This week on MuscleCar, Lou's bringing a mistreated Mustang back to life, starting with a dropped Mustang 2 front end. And our MuscleCar flashback is the end of an era, the last of the real 442s.
Yeah, muscle cars are us. Today is the tale of two ponies. Now, I'm not talking Disney either. I'm talking two ponies that are vastly different projects. And you might have seen this one before when we first picked it up. It was a work in progress with a long way to go. And in the coming months, we're going to build it into a full-spec vintage road race car. This is a really good starting point because it's a really solid car. It's going to get a complete new frame, some high-tech suspension, and lots of horsepower. To do that, it's going to eat up thousands of man-hours due to the fact that everything must meet some pretty tough safety requirements. You could easily spend over 100 grand on a project like this. In fact, the sky is the limit. This Mustang is a totally different project with a totally different goal in mind. I'm going to turn it into a G-Machine, which is a more affordable yet practical project to build. Now, the tough part about this is the previous owner got burned, and he got burned really bad. This thing is a true 60-footer. He thought he was getting a good foundation for a car, but he must not have known what he was looking at, because right here, you've got a common rust area with an uncommon repair. Who in the cornbread hell would use fiberglass to fix rust like that? Or this? There's enough inside this quarter panel to build a boat. And fiberglass in the trunk, and you can see underneath somebody had brazed it. That's a really old repair. He obviously knew he wanted to put some power to the pavement, but what he didn't know is that this car wasn't structurally sound enough to handle it. And then to add insult to injury, somebody convinced him to go and paint the car before the chassis work was even done. And he paid $5 grand for it. It looks good at first, but when you get up close, that's about $100 a bubble, $50 a scratch. Man, there's even mud in the roof. The point is this, guys. Make sure that you get a platform that you can work with. If you've got questions, ask them. If you don't know the answers, get somebody that can answer those questions. This guy literally blew his budget out of the water and had to walk away from the project before it even got started. This car is appropriate for its project, but this car's budget was not. But it is a fastback, so it's worth saving. So what I'm going to do is start over with a realistic budget and start from scratch. Being that the rear end is almost done in this thing, I'm going to turn my attention to the front end where I'm going to put in a Mustang 2. Now there's a few reasons for this. These shock towers get in the way of a lot of your engine swaps, not to mention that front end design just wasn't that good, and it doesn't lend itself to performance modifications. Now you can buy these Mustang 2 front ends from a bunch of different manufacturers. I've had this one hanging out in my shop for a couple years with nothing to put it in. The thing I like about it is you get rid of that stock bolt and cross member, and this one welds in using your existing frame rails. And the other thing is you move your spring location from the upper control arm down to the lower by utilizing these hats. On this car you can see what I mean. The stock spring and shock are located on the upper control arm. By using the Mustang 2 setup, it mounts it all down here on the lower control arm, making it a more efficient setup. I'm only cutting away the shock tower mounts and the engine mounts. I'm leaving the inner fender wells here for a little while longer. All right, now that everything's cleaned up, it's time to test fit our cross member. You remember, everything's built to ride height around here. Let's see what we got. Oh man, cross member's way too low. It's got to be at least 5 inches off the ground, but that's okay. Because like everything else, it's got to be modified. And we'll do that after the break.
Next, it's a big job, but MuscleCar can do it. Cross member and air suspension coming up.
Welcome back to the shop. I'm in the middle of resurrecting an abandoned Mustang project by putting a Mustang 2 front end under it. But because the ride height is so low, which I'm not going to compromise for anyone, I've got to raise my cross member. Earlier, we pre-fit our cross member. It's only 3 inches off the ground. It's got to be 5. So we've got a long way to go. And in order to get there, I'm going to take a piece of tubing, put it on top of my old frame rail, weld it all in to shore it up, and then I'm gonna cut out a big chunk of that factory rail. And to figure out how much, I had to measure 24¼ inches from the front, and that gives me my spindle location, and then all I have to do is measure enough to clear my lower control arms. It's time to start the modifications. First, you want to make a couple of small cuts on the top of your frame rail. So when you finish welding in your support tubing, those cuts on top will give you a nice clean cut when you remove those old frame rails. Now that the cross member's at the right ride height, 5 inches, I can tack it to the new frame rails. Always remember, tack everything together. It's always easier to break your tacks versus cutting your welds. Now it's time to start putting this baby together, starting with the hats. Now if you notice, the hat is higher in the front than it is in the back, and the reason for that is your anti-dive angle. It actually rocks your spindles back when they're installed, so when you're hitting the brakes, they want to go forward, because if they go past vertical, it gets really unsafe. It gives you better control for braking. Next is the control arms. I got this complete set from Southern Rods and Parts. They're inexpensive and they're easily converted to the airbags that I'm going to run. They have a larger base, so I need a little bit more clearance for movement. Now if I had decided to run springs, I would have to take this plate and weld it into my new frame rail, and it provides a relief for the spring. This way it doesn't hit anything. But I decided to go with some shockwaves from Air Ride. This way I can really get this baby in the dirt. Now it's time to install our upper control arms. I'm using these dropped S10 spindles from Beltec for a couple of different reasons. If I want to run big brakes, there's plenty of selections for it. Not to mention if I want to raise the car up 2 inches, all I got to do is get some stock spindles. With everything where I want it, it's time to make it permanent. That's a mighty fine piece of fabrication if I do say so myself. Now later on in the show, I'm going to connect these frame rails to the rest of the car. So don't go nowhere, don't go wandering off.
Coming up, Big Block and Crush and Rock, the last of the Muscle 442s.
During the muscle car years, big horsepower and big engines were the norm. And then the insurance companies got involved and put their thumb down on it. But nobody could ever claim they had the tick-tock tack. Only on the 71 442.
Today's Muscle Car Flashback, the 71 Olds 442 W30.
The Olds 442 was a legend of the muscle car years. 400 cubic inch engine in the GM A-body with a 4-barrel carburetor and 2 exhausts. Plenty of attitude. The W30 performance package was the hot version. It was a blueprinted and balanced 455 with forced air induction, special intake and exhaust manifolds, and heavy-duty suspension. Good on the street, bad for insurance. So GM didn't want to say how much power the big block Olds really made. The changes from a regular Cutlass are easy to pick out. Rear bumper cutouts to make room for the oversized exhaust tips. Super stock 2 wheels, red plastic inner front fender liners to save weight, and W30 war paint down the sides and on the top of the fiberglass hood. And that factory blueprinted 455 was sucking some serious air. With a double set of fresh air scoops, a special low restriction air cleaner, the 442 sat low and sinister on G70 14s, and some of them didn't stay on there that long. The 71 was the last of the 442s that was really good at slinging some rubber around. And even so, the horsepower was down from the year before. How much? GM used different measurements for the 71s, so you really can't compare without putting them on a dyno. But there's no question the 71 was a low compression engine that didn't make as much power. Muscle car expert Colin Comer says it's not that big of a loss now, because the 71 is better at handling the cheap gas of today.
The 70s with 10.5 to 1 compression you run them on pump gas and you have to retard the timing, which takes away as much performance as lower compression, in my opinion.
The W30 ran 14s at the track, but it handled better than most muscle cars, or about as well as you can expect from a 3,800-pound piece of Detroit steel.
This is a fantastic driving car.
And it had that Oldsmobile comfort inside with strato bucket seats and a center console, FM radio, even a clock and a tachometer in the same gauge. They called it the tick-tock tack. But the W30 was all muscle under that thin layer of luxury. The 4-speed from Hearst was the first clue. You couldn't even get power brakes on a 4-speed car because the can was so hot it didn't make enough vacuum. And look at those red inner panels to save weight up front, the dual exhaust in the back, and the 455 under that forced air hood. And there was one more sign that you could only hear. The Muncie Rock Crusher was a Super Duty transmission with nearly straight cut gears. They sounded like they belonged in a school bus, and you can only get them in 71.
When gears are positioned like that, you get the whine from them. They sound like they're crushing rocks. I like the strength and I like the noise.
That was only the first 3 gears. Fourth was a whole different story. 71 was the last year for a real 442. After that, it was just an appearance package. All show, no go. They don't make them like this anymore. And that's why the price of a good W30 has doubled in the last 2 years. So if you've got one, you better hang on to it. A really nice 71 W30 442 could run you 75 to 100 grand, but that one's not for sale.
And coming up, we knew this Mustang had some problems.
Oh, check this out. Oh!
Lou's making them right after this.
Welcome back to the shop, also known as the compound. In case you just got here, here's what you missed. We're still in our rescue mission on this rust-ridden Stang. When we started to put in the front end, my ride height was a little low, which led to some small modifications. The cross member was gonna plow the pavement, so we had to relocate the front frame rails just a touch. We even had time to install some A-arms, spindles, and some airbags. And I'm not done yet. I'm gonna take some tubing and weld it from the front of the subframe to the firewall. And if I've got time, I'm gonna put some subframe connectors in this baby. But first, these inner fender wells have got to go. I left them in place while I fabbed up the frame rails. They helped hold everything together and square till I got the thing welded up. I feel like an archaeologist uncovering 1,000-year-old stones. If you remember, I told you this car was structurally unsound. Well, check this out. This rust is so old it's all flaky. Water got between the pieces of steel and it just festered. And then you come down here and it's just poor metal prep. It just rusted right through. This rust really messes up my plans. I can't tie into the front of the frame rail and go into the firewall like I wanted. I wanted to take 2 plates and sandwich it and brace it up. So what I'm gonna have to do is put a piece of tubing in the rear, come forward, tie it into the front, and then when I build my roll cage, I'll come through the firewall, tie it in. Let's go bend some tube. I'm using 1 5/8 120 wall DOM tubing and started with a 35-degree bend. Then I simply eyeballed where the second bend should be. Now you want to make sure when you're doing your frame brace that you don't make it too high or else the hood won't close. So then you eyeball it and all you got to do is put it where you want it and mark it. Then you use this one to make an exact copy for the other side. Before we go any further, I need to strengthen up those pathetic original frame rails because that's where the tubing is going to be mounted. And remember, always use a mounting plate. Now I wanted my round tubing to go further apart as it went towards the rear of the car. That's why I had to put the square tubing in here so the tubing has somewhere to land. Not to mention, because they're going wider, it gives you room to work on the engine. And also, when I do my roll cage, it gives the A-pillar bars a nice place to come through and tie onto. It's time to tack this baby in. Tubing can't be higher than the fender. Test fit it. Oh yeah, I am the man. And with both of them in place, The front end is done. So it's time to install the frame connectors, and I tear the carpet out, and I come to a real serious realization. This car truly is a POS. You can see where somebody cut the car in half to replace the front end, and they did a really poor job of it. And that hole over there by the glove box, it didn't come from the factory. And once again, we've got this fashionable fiberglass rust repair. Oh, check this out. Oh, one piece, baby. Yes, yes. I needed to put in some temporary frame connectors just to move this car. And for the frame connectors, I'm gonna use 2x2 065 wall square tubing. I don't know about you guys, but I always tie my subframe into my rocker panels. You guys get the gist of what's going on. I can't finish welding in my frame rails because I got some work to do in the rear end, but that's another day. I'm really happy with the stuff I got done today on this thing. Although you won't be seeing it that often because I got some really cool projects right outside that door that I just gotta get done. But you will be seeing it from time to time because I got some really cool stuff to show you on Project Rustang later.